Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Arnis Luks here at the Freedom Forum, and I'd like to welcome my guests from Canada. Welcome, Robert Klinck.
Good to be here, Arnie. I hope I'll be here in more than voice, but I'm not being connected very well right now, it seems.
No worries. We appreciate your attendance, Robert, especially your contribution. And if the bandwidth isn't sufficient, it isn't sufficient, but we'll wrestle with it. And Wallace Klinck. Welcome, Wallace.
Oh, hi there, Arnie. It's not too bad out here now. We have very nice weather, and fortunately, out here in Western Canada, I seem to be coming through to communicate with you in a fairly satisfactory manner. So anyway, we'll be looking forward to today's session. I don't know how well prepared we are, but we're going to try.
That's it. Good on you. That's right. Thank you, Wally. Thank you, Robert, for joining me today. And the subject for today is metaphysics. Metaphysics, let's define it. The branch of philosophy that deals with the first principles of things, including abstract concepts such as being, knowing, identity, time, and space. But there's a dot point below it, and I think the dot point's interesting. Abstract theory with no basis in reality. An abstract theory with no basis in reality. That's a pretty profound statement because I look on metaphysics as how we actually get on, not just physically, but intellectually, or if you like, or spiritually is another word for it. We get on in our friendship, we get on in our love, our mutual cooperation, things like that. These to me are parts of metaphysics. It's how we actually engage in the world that we look at. Beauty, um, the spring morning, the sunshine, things like that. These to me are concepts that are metaphysical. They're not carnal, they're not physical, they're metaphysical. Robert Klinck, if we've got you, what are your thoughts?
Well, I suppose the ultimate metaphysical concept would be love. And this, in my estimation, is being undermined in our society. People have a lack of faith in perceiving the universe as an expression of love, and an attempt seemed to be being made to represent it as just a succession of crises from which people are suffering trauma. For example, we have the belief in the climate crisis, and we have 16-year-old girls now being our guide through it. This is becoming practically a new religion. Mm-hmm. We've had other religions in the past. Equality is constituted virtually a religion, the goal of achieving equality. But now we moved on to a situation where crisis and insecurity are driving the thought processes of people.
It seems to me to be.
So I would say that is in the edit. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it seems to me.
Go ahead, Arnie.
Yeah, that the issue we're looking at with these crises is abstract, because if we go outside and we look at the real world, then the real world is different from this abstract thinking. The real world is that we can manage it. I put a short sleeve jumper on today to accommodate a slightly cooler day, and it's not a profound thing to do. I put a long pair of trousers on instead of a short pair of trousers, and perhaps even a hat or an umbrella or something. I mean, you accommodate things quite easily, but in this area of fear, this abstract area of fear, it's almost, I think Gillard Atzmon called it pre-traumatic stress disorder. Pre-traumatic. In other words, you're not actually even experiencing it. It's pre-trauma. Pre-traumatic stress disorder. Wally Klinck, your thoughts, please.
You mean it's apprehensive?
It is, yeah.
I see. It's fear that is being induced before a thing is even
eventuated.
Evident.
Mm.
Well, in 1951, in the year prior to Major Douglas's death, Douglas being the founder of social credit, of course, he had become quite concerned about the fact that, well, in a way, he was grateful for the fact that people were supporting him, but he was disturbed by the number of misinterpretations that were being made, and the number of misrepresentations that were being made about the actual nature of social credit.
Mm-hmm.
And he drew up a diagrammatic representation, or a schema, to represent social credit in a way that would give people a structure to refer to, and in order to help them to avoid falling into error when they're talking about it. And one of the first, it's headed by saying society is metaphysical. And so when the reference that you read there, where it said that it was an abstract thing that wasn't necessarily related to reality, I personally do not agree with that. I think that he was saying very clearly that society is metaphysical. The problem is, metaphysical being an abstract area, the important thing is that the abstract area in which you are thinking should be in accord with reality. And certainly you can have abstract thought that is quite insane. You can have abstract thought that might be very profound. And it's in the nature of mankind, I think, that we seek profound truth,
Mm-hmm.
or we should do it if we're operating at our highest level of development. And so I think that this is very important. We are not just simply, as the Marxists say, we're not just simply matter in motion.
Mm-hmm.
We are beings that have cognitive powers. We have, emotion, and we have appreciations for the beautiful, as you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
We have, in other words, we are beings which generally have awarenesses and characteristics that tend to rise above the mere physical world. We're not just animals, because we have had a particular ability to modify our environment that animals do not generally have. There's some ability to modify the environment, but very little. And so that we have been able to do this to our great advantage, and and it's been a great adventure, the exploration, the search. It's been a marvelous adventure. And it has allowed us to progress in a way that we have we've lifted ourselves out of the necessity of merely living in caves. We now have all sorts of abilities to move, grasp vast distances at great speeds, to explore the world in a very comprehensive sort of manner, and to learn and to experience the knowledge of other people and how they think and how they live and how they approach life and how they try to solve their particular problems. So I think that we are, as Douglas said, yes, society is metaphysical. We have an existence that goes beyond the mere physical.
Yeah.
We have to refer to the physical, and we have to conform to physical laws in order to do things. But we have purpose and so on that extends beyond that. And that's what makes us human.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I think in that definition, I'm just going back to it, it talks about time, I mean, past, present, future. We look back to see how things worked or how things didn't work. We look back on the lessons of history. We look back on the methods of manufacture, on the way of building, the way of, if you like, our dress codes, the way of thinking, the evolution of thinking, the meaning of words as they've come into being with a new thought. I find that fascinating. Owen Barfield, his the meaning of English words. I find that fascinating. These different disciplines of science, these different disciplines of thinking. And that, to me, is what metaphysics is about. It's actually placing thoughts on the table and exercising those thoughts on the basis of reality. Is time as a thought, past, present, or future? In future time, are we heading towards something? Even this thinking, um, and this is only just a small grain of sand in the whole discussion of metaphysics, but to me it demonstrates that metaphysics is this area in which we think. Robert.
Well, Christ said he was the truth. And facing Pontius Pilate, he said he came to bear witness to the truth. And Pontius Pilate said, what is truth? But the fact that Christ, the founder of the Christian religion, stressed that there was a thing, the truth, which is synonymous, I presume, with reality, is what lies behind all these amazing achievements in human society and in Western human society, because people were oriented toward discovering reality and understanding it.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, I would say that this notion that our purpose in life is to search for the truth has largely gone out the window, and particularly young people are being brainwashed into imagining that through some strange process of osmosis, they are automatically in possession of the truth.
Mm.
And this has made, it's a lot like the phenomenon of the Red Guards in China. They turned all these young people loose. They brainwashed them with Mao's Little Red Book, and they went out and terrorized society because they knew the facts. They were the possessors of all wisdom and truth.
Mm-hmm.
It was obviously not true because they practically destroyed the society there. And we're seeing the same thing in our society with young people who have been brainwashed into conceiving that they know better than anybody else, that they can ignore all history, they can never read a book, they can never delve into the science of anything,
Mm-hmm.
and yet somehow they are inspired with knowledge and truth beyond.
Yeah, and I think you've just dropped out there, Robert, but I appreciate where you're going on that. I was thinking of the scholarship that I continually put in order to stimulate my brain and my thinking, and I'm constantly going through different books to see what the author has thought or the references to other documents, and continue to evolve, if you like, or develop my thinking. And I think it's really, really important that you do continue to develop your thinking, that you're not static, and that in this evolution of thinking, as Owen Barfield talks about with words, I mean, you think about the words that came in with modern computers, RAM and DOS, disk operating system, or the hard drive. I mean, these are the words. These are current usage words that mean something to us, and that's because they're in the practical world. They're in the physical world, and so we can actually relate to the meaning. But you go back 50 years, 100 years, and of course these words meant absolutely nothing. Your thoughts, Wally?
Well, as we go on and experience more and more in life, we obviously have to develop some kind of a medium by which to express, to give them meaning that we can convey to other people, and so we develop language. Of course, that's the nature of progress.
Mm-hmm.
I think the carnal or the material world is the how. The philosophical dimension of life is the why.
Mm.
We have certain goals, and we have to find out how to achieve certain things. But we also have to explain why we have those goals, and that's where you get into the metaphysical area.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what really is the elevating aspect of human existence,
Mm.
because that is the search for truth.
Yeah.
And we are in a constant, if we're in a healthy state, we're in a constant process of searching for truth.
Mm-hmm.
And today there is obviously a concerted effort being made, largely through the universities, to brainwash children, not to educate them. Educate means really to help them to develop their thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
It's so that they can draw from themselves, in a sense. But this is a question of the students simply being crammed with an arbitrary set of I don't know if you call them values in a sense, but an arbitrary language to portray reality.
Yep.
And it is a language which distorts reality as we have come to know it after all of these millennia. So they're obviously trying to interfere with the progress, the cultural heritage. They're trying to destroy it. They're damning it. They're saying that it's of no value, but they're not really defining for the students what is of value.
Yeah.
They are simply getting them. Students are subject today to a lot of uncertainty because we're living in a world where there are tremendous challenges that are arising primarily from financial causes.
Mm-hmm.
Finance is a thing that overlays everything else we do. People, unfortunately, are inclined, I think, to ignore it because they regard it as an abstract thing which they don't like to think about, or they just assume that it automatically reflects what we do, and they don't think that it is an active force in our lives. People, especially certain religious people, say that our problem is in ourselves. It's a moral problem, an ethical problem. We do have ethical and moral considerations, absolutely. But if your moral and ethical instincts are frustrated by a system of finance that makes it impossible for you to function in a successful and meaningful way, then it simply blocks the whole process. And students now, they have enormous debts that they can never hope to pay. They can't afford to even qualify for a mortgage, much less build a house. The whole thing of marriage is often deferred. Years ago, when I was in Hong Kong, I know our guide said that very many young people there deferred marriage because they couldn't afford it, not because they didn't naturally want it, because they couldn't afford it. And now, of course, this is spread out all over the Western world because of the enormous financial problems that we have. And we have to ask the question, are these problems real? Or are these problems induced? Are they induced by some kind of a metaphysics or a philosophy or an attitude which is imposed upon our actual realistic lives and is interfering with our ability to live our lives to their full?
Yeah.
And so you see, that's why metaphysics is so very important. Is metaphysics facilitative, or is it something that actually interferes with your progress? A sound metaphysics would be practical. It would be realistic, and it would be elevating, right?
Yeah, no, exactly right. The basis of metaphysics has to be bound back to the real world and its purpose or its policy. Is it to elevate or is it to control? Robert Klinck, are you there? Are you able to jump in on this?
Well, if you can hear me, I will.
We hear you.
Well, we have had progressed in every area so much, and I'm sure that the same can be said of psychology and the understanding of the human mind. And it really looks as if a deliberate attempt is being made to undermine the security that people should be feeling today because of the productive capacity of their society. There should be no more material concerns for people, except maybe a few who are going to get themselves into trouble because of their own foolishness. But ordinary people should be assured of economic support of the access to material goods in such a way that they do not have to fear for their future. Yet this is not done, and the concept is deliberately kept away, I would say, from young people who are living an insecure existence, and some of the attacks on them are really quite astonishing. You know, this gender dysphoria stuff, where little kids are being told that they don't really know what sex they are. That's something that they have to decide on their own. In Britain recently, a campaign has begun in some areas where little kids, I think even before the first grade, are being encouraged to make a bequest of their organs in case they should die. And this is just malice on a level that is almost incomprehensible. They are attacking the security that little kids should have. I mean, it's been bad enough with the destruction of families, and you know, the lasting effects of divorce and family strife, and all this is primarily the result of financial pressures that people are under. If there was a sustaining of people based upon their cultural heritage, based upon the productivity of society, then I'm sure there would marital strife would go down to zero practically, and there would be no more crime. The illegal drug trade would become irrelevant. People couldn't be sucked into criminal activity, and we'd have a transformed society. But there is no attempt being made to give people access to this enormous productive potential that surrounds them.
It's so frustrating, Robert. I see where you're coming from on this. It's so frustrating in an age of abundance, in an age of robotics and automation, and that we have a system of measure, that is so fraudulent. That you look at the standards that are set for time, they look at it in, I think it's light waves, in order to get it so accurate. That the standards set for length, I mean, they put it in an inert environment, and even at a controlled temperature, so that it is known down to the virtual such a finite degree. And yet finance as a measure of value is so arbitrary, and one country, their currency can be lunched, and I mean lunched, deliberately destroyed as policy, rather than as a standard, and say, well, this is a consistent approach. A bag of apples, this is the value of it, and it's held at that value. But it also comes back to in the metaphysics, and I think this is interesting because we talked about abstract earlier on. A bag of apples. What is the value of a bag of apples? And to me, the value is the life force that's in there for your body, the goodness that can be in there, especially if the tree is well fed and well watered, and it's a reasonable variety of apple. To me, the value is intrinsic. It's actually, if you like, metaphysical. It's not just carnal. Oh, it's an apple, I'll just eat an apple. No. It's actually the life forces in it. It's more than just the carnal. Your thoughts, Wally?
Well, that's right. I think it is well recognized that most serious marital problems and also problems with regard to aberrant behavior, or antisocial behavior, crime, and so on, are definitely related to conditions of privation or poverty, because people who live in poverty don't have the opportunity to explore the higher levels of awareness and cognition in general that wealthier people do, because wealthier people have an opportunity, they have access to sources of information, and they have the ability to access these things, whereas a lot of people just live in a very pathetic and a very really tragic circumstance where they don't have the opportunity to be introduced to life in its full. And of course, there is resentment, there is genuine suffering, there is deprivation, and there is, as Douglas said, if people behave adversely, when you annoy them, then perhaps the best thing to do would be to stop annoying them. In other words, if we made it possible for people to enjoy the standard of life that enables them to be free, this whole aspect, the whole aspect of this situation would be changed. So, and you see the metaphysics that we're being introduced to today is a rather mindless sort of thing, where they're trying to separate the meaning of things, of words from things, which means that they're trying to fractionate your mind. They're trying to make it so that you cannot relate things within your rational cognitive mind to things as they are. And when you do that, a person loses their ability to function. And then they can't, they can be treated simply as marionettes, or they're just simply at your mercy. And there's some people, let's face it, we're in a situation where there's an enormous struggle for power. There are certain people who believe that centralized power on a global scale is desirable. They think it's even necessary. And there are certain people who do it for reasons of wanting to wield power over their fellow man, which from our aspect, I think it's probably the greatest evil of all. Because if you believe that the individual is something unique and special, having certain rights in life and the right to experiences and to pursue truth, then you cannot possibly subject them to the edicts or the dictates of some central world authority. And you can be assured that if a world government is set up, or some kind of an administrative body like that, there will be a concentration of policy, because that's the reason it's being done, and it will be used for the purpose of imposing external will upon other individuals, which is the ultimate evil. And it will simply destroy life, because life is made up of the mix, or the complex interaction of free individuals. That's what life in its full sense means. And so I think that we're very, very foolish if we allow ourselves to think that the centralization, the concentration of world power is a solution to our problems. We need to have a situation where life is allowed to unfold, not to be pre-planned and imposed. That is the ultimate tyranny. And that's what Douglas said when he made his initial discovery about the defect in the price system, and how it did not allow the consumer to access what is being produced unless the consumer mortgages his future, which means working on other unrelated things before you can enjoy what you've already done. And it's going to create a totally dictatorial situation. It's just, if you have your logic, you can understand that. But if you are being led into all sorts of, down all sorts of paths which are totally fruitless, where you can't think rationally about the consequences of actions, then you are simply a victim of those who hold power to determine circumstances around you, and you can be enlisted to actually assist them in their illegitimate and immoral, irresponsible aspirations. It's I listened to a very long and I thought excellent treatment of what's going on in the way of propaganda and brainwashing of the students in the universities especially, although it extends beyond that to the media and so on. But they did an excellent job of descriptive job of explaining what's going on, and also beyond that. But they did not really touch upon the force or the element of finance as being the governing, the overarching governing force in life, and that comes from a central source. We are prevented from doing the things we want to do creatively and from realizing the results of those actions by this thing which we call money. Now, money should simply be a system of accountancy which reflects in an unbiased manner what we do, allows us to do that. But money is used as an instrument of power. If you want to produce something, you have to get credit. If you want to consume something, you have to have sufficient money in order to do it. And today you can't do it. We've reached a stage where you have to have enormous amounts of credit. In other words, debt as an obligation on your future in order to realize the benefits that flow from the productive aspects of society. And it is this, the social credit identifies consumption as the area of prime concern in this overall problem, because it is the stopping up of consumption at the end of the productive process that really causes our problems. And that is a financial problem, because we need financial money in order to demand, to have effective demand, and to allow the producer to recover his costs and to carry on in the constructive activities that he is doing in providing for the community. If he can't sell, then he can't produce. And that's why we have these build-ups of cyclical economy, where debt is used in order to keep the thing going. And the debt gets so great that it either falters or it is deliberately contracted as a matter of policy, and the economy collapses, and people's assets are simply they're foreclosed on. It is a gigantic scam, a gigantic power and wealth centralizing scam, actually, that is being perpetrated against or upon society. And society doesn't realize that the problem is people simply accept it and react to it, but they react to it in a non-constructive manner because they don't understand the actual technical nature of the problem, and they don't understand fully the metaphysics of the power aspects of it. And so that they are rather helpless, and they simply react as they can in a helpless sort of manner to circumstances that afflict them because of this constant fluctuation back and forth of an economy, which should be, from any rational standpoint, quite stable. I mean, if you can be like in the 1920s, if you can be just going absolutely mad with development, and then all of a sudden you go into a depression, and then you come out of the depression, it certainly doesn't mean that you're short of resources. It means that something you're doing is really dysfunctional.
That's right. Or it's controlling the situation.
It's contrived.
Yeah, that's right. We're at nearly 34 minutes. Robert, I'll give you the floor, but take into account our time. We'll be looking for closing comments. Robert Klinck.
Okay, well, a fellow quite a few years ago now named Gustave Le Bon wrote a book on collective psychology, and he analyzed how people in groups have different personalities, and their thought processes are different, and they lose their ability to think as individuals. And I would say that this is a problem underlying the situation we're in today, because people are reinforcing false concepts just by their mutual communication. And, you know, in practically every organization, the primary consideration is careerism.
Mm-hmm.
But careerism is something that will take your ability to think as an individual away from you. So it's an example of this mob psychology. And one hopes that as people become more conscious of reality, particularly economic reality, and of the way in which they've been controlled, that they will break away from this control through mob psychology. But I think it is something that we don't pay enough attention to and really deserves study as a way in which we are being manipulated.
Yeah, no, very, very, very good summary there, Robert. I'm going to make a point of putting quite a few links up. I've brought them up on my other screen at the end of this broadcast. Put the links up because I believe that this is not an easy subject you can listen to for half an hour and then you've come to grips with it, but rather you've got to actually go after it, delve into it deeply in order to start to wrestle with these concepts and start to actually, if you like, renew your mind, renew your thinking, change your point of view so that you can actually flower as an individual and take the initiative and be creative in your thinking, taking into account the real world. These are all really, really important principles to see how it actually works in reality, or if you like, natural law. Closing comments, Wallace Klinck, please.
Well, it's been the accusation has been made that these people in universities and so on are actually stealing from children their childhood. They're stealing their innocence. They're stealing their normal inclinations, their normal interests, and they are bombarding them with something that is getting them off on an angle that is completely abnormal, unnatural, and destructive to their personal development.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that's what's happened to society as a whole because of the financial system. We have been simply run down a rabbit trail that we don't understand. We don't know where we're going, except we know that things are getting more difficult all the time. You see, at one time, I think we had within our capabilities the idea that we should follow objective knowledge. Objective knowledge. But there is nothing objective about being told that you are a gender that you're not, or that you have a perfect ability to determine your gender, quite aside from the objective scientific aspects of the nature. You see, they're trying to literally make us slaves. That's right. They're trying to get us to the point where we have lost our ability to think objectively, which means that we are losing our ability to control or to modify our environment to our own advantage. And this puts us in a position where the culture of society and the conditions of society are moving into a downward spiral instead of moving ahead as they should. So I think that we're facing a very serious situation with some very misguided and mischievous elements who frankly should be told that they're not going to run our lives.
Yeah, no, very good. Thank you for that, Wallace. I'm going to cut across to a website which is due out just this coming week, and it's on Planning the Earth from Jeffrey Dobbs. And the thought for the week, I'm not going to read it. I'm going to direct you there. It's a beautiful summary of actually turning around, if you like, and I'm going to use the word repent and acknowledge that we're heading in the wrong direction and we need to change what we're doing. And I think Jeffrey Dobbs puts it beautifully there in his thought for the week from one of his two major booklets on planning the earth and the local world. And I've made the effort this last week to produce them into a PDF so that you can download it and print them and have them in your personal files for reference and for future study. It really, really is important. Metaphysics, the way we think, how we think, what we place as our reality. It's not, if we can't relate it back to the real world, we can test it in the real world. Is our reality simply abstractionism and not being bound back to the real world, or is it a reality? And so we need to continually test these things, these hypotheses, if you like, of as we understand it, as we place these rules as we understand them. This is the nature of reality. Put them into the real world, see how they work. And if they function well, well, that's good. Then you know that you're close to the mark. But if they turn out to be a complete disaster, and this collective idea, this world power, this world government, every time it's attempted, every single time. I note that China at the moment is going through high level purges, that people are being encouraged, these oligarchs are being encouraged to immediately retire. And because the power base, this dominance hierarchy, if you like, this power base is feeling a little bit vulnerable, and so it needs to secure its power base by removing any who might challenge the power. And that's the only way these systems work. It's one of power over people. And the fact is, as individuals, we need to have the inherent acknowledged right to exercise power over ourselves. This is the
Mhm.
nature of the human spirit. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Wally, for today's forum. Well discussed, and no doubt we could stay on this for a long, long time.
Thank you, Arnie. I really appreciate your closing comments. I think you got very close to some very, very fundamental and important things.
No worries. And Robert, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Arnie.
No worries. Good on you. Cheers, ladies and gentlemen. Arnis Luks at the Freedom Forum.